Hello everyone, welcome to version 1.3 of my Resident Evil Village, Village of Shadows difficulty. No damage, no extra content items, no infinite ammo walkthrough. This is going to be the full game, just like what I did previously in version 1.2. And compared to version 1.2, version 1.3 actually has some significant changes to previous strategies that I've implemented in the previous versions. And also with some new mentalities associated with the editing process for this particular game. So one of the biggest changes that I'm going to be doing for version 1.3 is I am negating Beneviento's area entirely. So the moment I get to Beneviento's gate, it's just going to transition to me finishing Beneviento's area and just going past all those enemies with the Moriekas and the Lycans, and then we continue from there towards Moreau's area. It's not because I have anything against Beneviento's area, but given that you've already seen me do this particular restriction many times before, you already have a great idea as to what I'm going to be saying, what I'm going to be doing, and it'll make it easier for myself so that I don't have to explain things again. And there's a lot to talk about with Resident Evil Village, and there's also a project that I need to talk about that I'll be doing in the future related to Resident Evil Village. But expect it to be one that is very heavy towards the negative side of Resident Evil Village. I'll explain it when I get the chance. But right now we're doing the village ambush right here, and we're trying to deal with this Lycan right here. So I'm just playing it safe, although I'm doing 3 slashes instead of 2 slashes by doing the block cancel method, which is already a very stupid system that they decided to implement because new Capcom doesn't know how to design knives in the Resident Evil games anymore, apparently. Since for some reason Ethan has to stop knifing after 2 slashes, then you have to cancel his animation by blocking. And the thing is with how poorly the inputs are actually registered in the game, like, you know the amount of times I'm trying to select a weapon and I have to press the D-pad like so many times because the game has so much trouble actually registering my input? Or you know the amount of times where I can't get a consistent rhythm down with actually pressing the block button after 2 slashes because of the fact that the inputs are just poorly registered, and yet people want to say, oh, it's so skillful, this and that, yet it clearly shows their preference for outdated games where input delay was so heavily apparent back in the older generation of games, back on like the Nintendo Saturn or whatever that, Sega Saturn, sorry, or like the PS1 or all these kind of games where input delay was heavily apparent. Yeah, why do you want to rely upon those kind of individuals to offer any kind of critique on mechanical designs in a future game? Seriously, the most retarded individuals on the planet, and these people clearly don't know exactly what skill is, and they think making quality of life mechanics hard to deal with is somehow suitable for skill. Like, how delusional can you be? And how out of touch with reality can you possibly be when you're making such statements like that to the point where you're not even human? It's like when people say, oh, Resident Evil 6's AI is somehow better than Resident Evil 5's AI, yet the AI in Resident Evil 6 does nothing. And if you played Chris's campaign, and you've seen just how much the AI screws you so much during like the chopper boss fight, for instance, you see them being so inactive, and then you have those moments in Chapter 5, for instance, of Chris's campaign, where you're trying to get Piers into the elevator or getting your AI partner into the elevator, and there's no kind of command system that allows them to get into the elevator because they're just declining your commands, and you're fighting the game at that point, and you're just taking damage in the process. Yeah, I never had to deal with anything like that with Sheva. I never had to deal with that at all with Resident Evil 5's AI, aside from AI Chris, of course, because AI Chris is worse than AI Sheva. Like, it's just, it makes no sense how people could be so out of touch with what makes a game what it is and what actually defines a game on a functional level. It seriously just pisses me off to no end. And believe me, guys, there is going to be a lot of shitting on people when I do that feature project. And if you need a general idea as to what the future project is for Resident Evil Village, I did this game Knives Out on Village of Shadows difficulty, and you might be thinking, oh my god, why are you wasting your time with that kind of restriction? And oh, you're a fucking hypocrite. Why are you saying that you did this restriction, yet you've been chastising new Capcom for glamorizing this kind of restriction? That just seems very hypocritical of you. Well, don't think of it like that, you fool. The reason why I'm doing that kind of restriction, and the reason why I'm doing a video on it, is to actually just voice nothing but negativity towards new Capcom and to every single delusional player trying to say that Knives Out is suitable for Resident Evil Village. And furthermore, I've been getting comments from these individuals on certain Resident Evil videos of mine where they have been saying like very casual comments on, oh, I wish I knew that for Resident Evil Village and Knives Out. And Like I actually used that to my advantage because I played the part of a very friendly individual, someone who was very welcoming to the whole idea of Knives Out and Resident Evil Village, and I made them voice certain comments in order to expose their stupidity and actually just chastise it in the later videos, which was definitely like the most enjoyable experience I had. But also, I mean, I feel kind of scummy like that because it's, these people are coming to my videos, they're posting very innocent comments, this and that, not really aware of my point of view on certain issues with the Resident Evil series. But, I had to do it because I had to come up with something that would at least allow me to put in some effort into the commentary for this kind of project that I'm doing. And that's what I ultimately resorted to. And, even if they are a completely innocent individual, it doesn't sit right with me that they could possibly consider this kind of run in Resident Evil Village, doing it Knives Out. Like, there's no way in hell they possibly ran through this experience in their mind and they thought it was actually fun. And I've already talked a lot about this point in this Resident Evil 3 Remake walkthrough became a Resident Evil Village disappointment video, where I went ad nauseum talking about the whole idea of Knives Out in Resident Evil Village and why new Capcom is so deluded into thinking that this game, a game that is designed with all the weapons in mind, is suitable for Knives Out, and why the people who say this is the most fun run that they've ever done in Resident Evil Village are the most impotent individuals on the planet. And they seriously are brain dead if they think that such a restriction is suitable for the game. Like the culmination of all these factors together just really made me have the urge to do something like that. And I went through this game on Village of Shadows difficulty doing a full Knives Out challenge. And I've saved the videos, and they're currently sitting in my capture gallery right now. But I need to separate the videos out into parts because it's not going to be like one full segment of, oh, here's this perfect run I got. I'm going to showcase the mistakes I got. I'm going to showcase the restarts I got just to really put those people in their place and just really, really try to appeal to whatever little conscience and dignity or integrity that they have and really voice the question of, is this really fun when you're watching it? Like, that is what the whole point of that future project is that I'm going to be doing for Resident Evil Village when I get the chance. And it's all going to be in individual parts. It's not going to be one single segment video. That's exactly how it's going to go. But we're now approaching Bella right now, and Bella is still one of the worst fights ever made in the entire Resident Evil series. And I have actually replicated Ether's strategy. I posted a video of it. And, I did come across some issues implementing Ether's strategy for Bella. And it's a quick method, but it's prone to a lot of RNG, because there's no telling what the Moriekas do. And you're at the risk of Bella not flinching from the shotgun correctly if you're not aiming your shotgun correctly. And, because all the shells have to get inside of Bella in order for the stuns to be a little more consistent, and the reticle can be kind of dishonest at times, depending on your distance. It's not the most reliable method, and I think because Ether was on PC, because PC has certain advantages compared to console, that's another reason why it's probably not the best method to use on console. And like I said, it's always best to approach your games at the bare minimum when it comes to like your console and not playing on PC where you're updating everything to your certain specifications because you're not learning anything in the process. Like, that's why I'm still resorting to this method, and I've made some alterations to this method that I'm using. And if you don't know, Bella will always do the bullshit grab, which you cannot avoid, which is so bullshit, absolutely bullshit, that they could think that that kind of hitbox on the grab is suitable for this kind of boss that is inside of narrow corridors, and she spams it like crazy if she flinches. And then you have her combo attacks, and my alteration that I made with this particular strategy is I'm going to showcase how to actually crouch and avoid all of the hits in her combo attack, because the third hit in her combo attack is unavoidable if you don't do the method I'm going to showcase in a moment. And I think I showcased it right around here, but you gotta crouch like this, and then before the third hit comes towards you, you have to shoot your gun, because what happens is when you fire your gun in Resident Evil Village, your hitbox kind of shifts, and I'm guessing because of the way Bella's hitboxes are designed, that actually applies very well. However, this doesn't work on every single enemy. There are certain enemies on this game where even when you do shift your hitbox forward by shooting your gun, it doesn't work. And there are also those moments where it's just better to just aim your gun, and I did notice, and I demonstrated it when I was fighting the Soldat Zwei and the Soldat Eins, when I was demonstrating the knives out, or I'm sorry, the knife only strategy for dealing with them, and the way the stuns actually work on them. that when you aim certain weapons, and this only applies to every other gun except for the knife and the tac shotgun, if you aim them and you're like actually like aiming the camera in the right direction, you can actually avoid attacks that I previously said you couldn't avoid. And I actually demonstrate this when I encounter a Berserk Solat Eins later on in Heisenberg's factory, and it's only with the Berserk variants where the stuns are dictated very differently compared to how they are when you're dealing with the normal variants of the Soldat Eins and the Soldat Zwei. And it's really cool. Like, it's a really cool hidden design on new Capcom's part, and it's one of the very few Resident Evil designs that they put in place with this game, where only Resident Evil is the only series that will do this. But there's no incentive to do it because it's just miles better to just run past everything, and you have a lot of flash grenades at your disposal. And trying to go out of your way to even kill the soldats is just a waste of time because it's just not efficient, and you don't get any kind of reward, like any good rewards, and you've already amassed a lot of treasure from them and from every other part of the game before Heisenberg's factory. So, like, why would they do that? And, you know, it's also the same case with the shotgun counter that you can do against the Varkalax when they do their jump attack on you, or any of their long-range attacks. You can knock them back with the shotgun and put them into a unique stun animation that only Resident Evil would put in. But there's no incentive to do so because the Varkalax take a beating, and it's just better to stealth right past them. So, like, it's like new Capcom is showing that because they've sidelined all these Resident Evil designs to just the corners of the game, it shows they don't value those designs, and this is what you're getting instead. You're getting just a simplistically designed game where the only methods that you're going to be doing is just damage race everything, run past everything, and just mindlessly upgrade at the merchant. Those are your three options with this game. And those are just three options that every single game would do. Like, every single generic game out there would just favor, rather than skillfully designed systems. And that's all just part of the RPG designs that this game favors, which is just seriously retarded. Absolutely retarded. Oh, this right here. I'm making a slight alteration to the strategy for getting past Lady Domitresk, because I actually found that running towards her rather than going to her side is a little bit better, but you have to pay attention to where the Morieka goes. If the Morieka is heading right towards you when she's breaking the cage, you want to take the left path. If not, you want to take this path. And I had a rare moment in one of my earlier playthroughs at Resident Evil Village where I did the whole animation of pulling the switch, but because the Morieka was very close to me, it did the horizontal attack that you can't crouch under because of how shit the hitbox is designed. Obviously, I have no way to actually stop it or back up because the wall's in the way, so I ended up taking damage, which is so dumb. Like, did they not think that was going to be a possibility? And you wonder why I say this placement of the Moriekas in Lady Domitresk's area right here is bad. Not only because it completely diminishes her role as just a very intimidating antagonist in that moment, but because of situations like that that are near impossible to avoid because of how shit they designed the hitboxes with the Moriekas, specifically with that horizontal attack. And it's the same case with the grabs. Like, in one of my recordings here that actually failed while I was busy doing this, when I was in the dungeon area preparing for Bella, I had a moment where the Morieka went into the grab stance, so I knew I had to block, but for some reason, out of nowhere, I took damage. Why? And I was pretty close to the Morieka, and I took damage through my guard, which makes no sense because you're supposed to be able to block the Morieka's grab and not take any damage. Such a load of trash. An absolute load of trash. And it just clearly shows the laziness and lackadaisical nature of new Capcom if they can't even program their hitboxes correctly with this game. And in recent developments, Resident Evil Village has received the Golden Joystick Award for Best Game of the Year, like Ultimate Game of the Year. And it doesn't deserve that. And yet there is that part of me that is just thinking maybe it does deserve it because Resident Evil needs that. You know, it's always great when a Resident Evil game gets like Game of the Year and the like, but at the same time, this game is filled with so many poor designs, and I've already showcased them in my poor designs of the Resident Evil Village series, and I'll be showcasing even more issues when I do my Knives Out challenge, and I've just showcased the pure stupidity of new Capcom with how they designed this game, with how rushed this game is, with how like awkward the storytelling is, with the number of plot holes present, with the number of bad designs present, with the number of lazy designs present, just like so much when it comes to problems that really shouldn't be the case at this stage. This is a AAA developer, and the last great Resident Evil game that we had was Resident Evil 7, which utilized a very similar format to this, only with changes that were actually miles better than the changes that they made with Resident Evil Village. And they're making these kind of mistakes at this point. And yes, COVID had an impact, but yeah, how can you say COVID had an impact when it comes to how the Moriekas are placed in Bella's boss fight? Like, the situation where Bella doesn't attack because the Morieka's AI is getting in the way of her AI, those kind of moments could easily be fixed if they just remove the Moriekas. COVID-19 has no impact. Like, COVID-19, like, the way the developers think of these kind of designs are independent of the COVID-19 pandemic, when such a problem like that could easily be fixed by removing a design or making a very minor change. You can't blame the pandemic on that at all. QA should have easily looked at that and said, no, this is not good. Remove the Moriekas from that situation. Just remove them from that area. Or fix a lot of the other broken hitboxes, or at least put a little bit more effort into designing these kind of fights. You call this a fight right now? And you want to know something? Daniela is just so annoying on Knives Out because you have to do the waiting game so much with her because you have to make sure that she's right near a piece of geometry, like she's on the other side of the geometry, then you got to stand on the other side. And because this game doesn't have the whole system that Resident Evil 7 had, where enemies never try to recognize your hitbox or the geometry, she'll try to attack you through the bookshelf or through these other pieces of geometry, but she can't get the hit out because her hitbox is disabled through the geometry. This isn't the case with every single enemy, as you've seen before with Moreau, when his vomit attack can go through the geometry, which is bullshit. But putting her into that animation where I force her to do the grab animation through the geometry and she's in the recovery animation, I knife her a bit and then I run back to the switch. And I run back to the switch because you don't have a lot of time to knife Daniela here. And if she sets up near the switch, there is really no way to hit the switch properly, and when she goes back into her fly form, the hitbox on the flies is bullshit because she can hit you with phantom range. Like, they have more range than they should. Just, like, she's a moving hitbox at that point. Like, when she goes into the flying phase, she's a moving active frame period the whole time when she's in her fly phase, and the active frames are placed so poorly in her animation, and the distance she covers is absurd. So that's why I have to resort to the slow method and, like, stuff like that. And then they want to glamorize Knives Out in Resident Evil Village, yet they want to make fights like that awkward. They want to make fights awkward. They want to encourage a lot of bad designs. They want to not put any emphasis on the combat. They want to not put any emphasis on the enemy types. I mean, look at this right here. We're dealing with the Samkas, and this is the final time you'll be dealing with Samkas. And the only other time you'll encounter them is in side areas. Like, they're such a forgettable enemy, and I'm not even going to be looking at them or anything. I mean, I shot that first one just to get him out of the way when I do the zipline, but look, I'm not even, like, looking at them. I'm just staring at the ground just to showcase my point that they're just a forgettable enemy. They might as well be nothing. There might as well be no enemies here. And the only time the Samkas are ever going to be a pain in the ass is if their AI screws up and they path into a wall, or they just squirrel all over the place because their AI is just so squirrely at best. And that is why you get those situations where randomly out of nowhere, a Samka just blocks your path, and then they deal damage to you just out of nowhere. And it's not because of you, it's because of their squirrely AI nature, because they didn't bother refining the AI systems on the Samkas, and the Samkas are just a waste of time, and they take too much punishment. I mean, it's cool that the shotgun makes them flinch, but when they take this much punishment and the shotgun is needed for the damage spongy bosses, like, when you're going to be making your bosses damage spongy, where is the whole incentive to actually, like, deal with any of the enemies? And, like, you're going to be giving a lot of these poor designs to the enemies, and you're going to be relying upon exploit areas, you're going to be relying upon flash grenades. Like, they did not put any emphasis on making the enemies actual threats on this game. The enemies feel more like obstacles than actual threats. And the only time they aren't obstacles is in very select sequences, but there's barely any situation like that. And the times when they are a threat, the poor designs just take place, and it makes you not respect the enemies at all. And now we have Cassandra here, and Cassandra is at least a decent fight, and I'm going to be staying on this half of the area right here and just using the boxes to my advantage. And once again, she always does the grab, then she does the 2 combo attacks, and if she does the range attack right here, you got to make sure you time your running away in order to avoid it, or just strafe away from it, simple. And the whole system of crouching under their combo attack does work, but I don't want to waste time with that, and the room is a little small for that. But once again, I'm just going to be emptying the clips on my weapons, and then I'm just going to be using my pistol and just reloading only that weapon, so that when I upgrade my clip capacity, I'll at least get all that ammo back and not lose any of my reserve ammo for my sniper rifle and my shotgun. That is how that is going to work. And just to go on a little bit of a positive note, I do like Cassandra and Bella. I like their voice actors. I like their character. Daniela's the only one that I don't like. Daniela's just annoying. You know, she talks too much like a little kid, and yeah, that's all I have to say about her. She's not terrifying. She's not like something that's intimidating. Bella and Cassandra are actually intimidating. It's just a shame that their poor designs just get in the way of actual lethal designs. But I like their voice actors. I love the sounds that they make, because the sounds that they make, with, like when Bella does her running attack and she goes into the recovery frames and she does her roar sounds terrifying. That's why I've even made like videos showcasing the sound effects of Cassandra, because yeah, it's just a shame that her voice actor died, because she did a really great job of really capturing the terror of these kind of enemies. And you know, they really made like these kind of human-like enemies feel terrifying compared to anything else in the other Resident Evil games. But in their actual gameplay implementation, they're really poor, and that's why I cannot really rank them on the same levels as with the enemies from Resident Evil 7, for instance. But when it comes to their performance, it's mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. I'm absolutely impressed by these voice actors and what they did for Bella and Cassandra. But that's really the only positive I have to say about that, and everything else is just negative. Like with how their mutation works, their whole mutation of somehow being able to dissociate into individual flies and somehow manifest skin, manifest teeth, manifest weaponry somehow, and they're able to go through doors and somehow manifest out of walls, and it makes no sense. It really doesn't make any sense, and I feel like the mutation isn't explained very well. And you know, it could have easily been explained away by just being hallucinations, and Ethan could have been hallucinating something else. But you know, they decided to make it a real phenomenon that is happening in the game, and that is why it makes no sense, and it's a poorly explained mutation. Like somehow the Kadu just laid eggs, and those eggs conveniently turned into flies, and the flies have no kind of reproduction. I mean, it makes sense why they would like fall dead under the cold. But it doesn't make any sense how their mutation works, how they're able to manifest clothing, how they're able to manifest everything else. It's just a poorly implemented mutation system. And everything else, when it comes to the other mutations, it feels like there's a little bit more sense to them. Like, it makes sense why those mutations would be the case, but with the way the daughters are portrayed, that just doesn't make any sense to me. It really doesn't make any sense to me at all. And I just think it's a great example of new Capcom taking way too many liberties and not really putting the science of Resident Evil and like the biological horror at the forefront, and instead they're just favoring these kind of moments just to like make it seem like it's fantasy when it actually isn't, and they don't bother giving any kind of really good explanation. And speaking of explanations, you know, one thing that really pisses me off? You know, in Heisenberg's area, like when you go in the dark and you go back to the like B4, you can actually go into that room where you get that Magnum part, and there's an audio log that you can listen to, which is one of the coolest designs that they favor with Heisenberg's factory. And there's something like this in Dimitrescu area as well. Like, they give you these files that explain these mutations, and they give you lore. They give you lore that is so crucial to understanding the mold and the Kadu and how the mutation works and the like. But they don't bother giving anything like that with Beneviento's area or Moreau's area. And the lore that they give you, it's only like one piece of lore per area in Dimitrescu's area or in Heisenberg's area. Like, why didn't they put more emphasis on the documents and the lore? This is one of the most fascinating things ever in a Resident Evil game, when you're understanding how these mutations are being apparent, but they put no effort into it. At least in that area of Heisenberg's factory, it feels like you got something out of it aside from just getting a Magnum part. Like, that's just a great example of how like lacking the quality is in new Capcom compared to old Capcom. Old Capcom would actually make every single situation worth it, and you're not just being forced to go to these areas. You're going to these areas because you're interested and you want to get supplies. Like, you know, like Resident Evil Village is so forceful in trying to get you to go into the side areas, and thankfully you don't have to do that most of the time because you sell your weapons and, you know, you sell other things. But it's just the incentive to go to these areas and like the incentive to even partake in the lore is just, it's very little in Resident Evil Village. And initially in my blind playthrough, I was very interested in the lore because, you know, it's a new Resident Evil game, this and that. And, you know, that's expected from your initial playthrough. But, you know, when I'm looking back at Resident Evil Village, it's the lacking qualities in actually making the lore have more depth to it, and like the shortcuts that they took with the storytelling, it's downright damnable. It's really damnable. Just damn them to hell for really messing with the lore so much. And I've already demonstrated how Resident Evil Village's lore just completely conflicts with the lore established in Resident Evil 7 when you're looking at Ethan's mutation via the mold and how it makes no sense because you'd have to consider other factors from Resident Evil 7's lore that just conflict with it, and you have to wonder why the BSAA didn't actually recognize Ethan's mutation. And you have all these people being like, oh, it's because the BSAA are evil. They actually knew about Ethan's mutation, and they wanted to do something with it. But given what you're seeing in Resident Evil Village, you think the BSAA had anything to do with Ethan's mutation? You think they actually tried to get something out of Ethan's mutation? Like, they were basically trying to go and get the Mega Buy seat, but they didn't bother following up on Ethan or anything, or actually seeing what he could do to benefit them. There is nothing like that in Resident Evil Village, so that explanation is already very flawed. It's really flawed. There is nothing you're going to convince me of when it comes to why the BSAA could easily miss Ethan's mutation. And furthermore, if Ethan's mutation is canon, how are the healing items canon? Just explain to me, like, what are we supposed to think of with the healing items, for instance? Like, do the healing items actually exist? Like, did healing items in the previous Resident Evil games exist? Like, and somehow the Duke conveniently has healing items befitting for mold-infected individuals? Like, what the fuck is that about? That makes no sense! That makes zero sense! And it's very poor storytelling. And I'm definitely going to go into the very poor storytelling when I do my Resident Evil Village review after the DLC releases, which we already know is going to be a lacking DLC. Like, Resident Evil Village is already filled with a lot of lacking quality, and I imagine this lacking quality is already going to be apparent in the DLC, and it's going to be a reskin of Mercenaries mode. It's going to be some forgettable mode that has no direct references to the story. It doesn't add anything to the story. It doesn't introduce anything creative. And I'm sure its lack of creativity will be on the same levels as the Ghost Survivors DLC from Resident Evil 2 Remake. Complete reskin of Fort Survivor, and then the No Way Out scenario is just a dumbed down version of Night Terror DLC. That's all I'll say about that, and you're just fighting nothing but zombies. Like, I don't have any faith that the DLC is going to be good, and yet people want to say, oh, this game is worthy of the Ultimate Joystick Award for Ultimate Game of the Year. Really? Are you that delusional? Are you seriously that delusional? Are you that high? It makes no sense. I mean, like, with Lady Dimitrescu's performance, I can understand, and then the audio design. I mean, the audio design leaves something to be desired, though, because there are those situations where the audio can be very confusing to interpret. And, you know, I like the way the game looks, and I like what they did with Ethan Winters, with his sacrifice at the end, even if it was to hide the fact that they botched up the lore so much in Resident Evil 7 by making Ethan be made out of the mold, and they didn't want fans to question it further, so they just killed off Ethan at the end. And, you know, like, not thinking about that, Ethan's sacrifice is amazing, but when you are thinking about that, that's probably the likely reason as to why they made Ethan Winters sacrifice himself at the end, so that they didn't have to somehow put in any more effort into helping us understand why Ethan was even made out of the mold in this game. And they didn't want to explain the healing items, they didn't want to explain all these situations where, for some reason, the villains didn't recognize that Ethan was made out of the mold, and they didn't want to explain Miranda further, they didn't want to explain Evelyn further. That's really, like, what you have to view that situation as. That's the only logical reasoning for that. But I'm not going to dwell on this tangent any further. However, I will say, though, one of my videos has been doing really well, and I didn't expect it to do so well. Like, all I did was make my most memorable Ethan Winters quote video, which I posted about 2 months ago. And I did not expect the video to do so well. I've already received, like, 51 likes on that video. And it's good to see that people love Ethan Winters almost as much as I do, because Ethan Winters is my favorite character in all the Resident Evil games. Like, the guy's a seemingly normal individual with no fighting experience. He has some memorable dialogue. He's actually, like, crucial in the villains' minds. Like, they actually treat him as a threat. I mean, Lady Dimitrescu even takes the time to say his name, and it's so unexpected for someone of a higher class to acknowledge someone of a lower class. And he's just a magnet for really cool villains. I mean, the Baker family were cool villains. Evelyn was interesting, even if her storyline wasn't, like, the best when it came to its explanation. And he's a magnet for these villains that you're encountering in Resident Evil Village, which, personality-wise, they're amazing. But gameplay-wise, Heisenberg is really the only one that stands out, and so is Lady Dimitrescu. Beneviento's a gimmick fight, but then Moreau is garbage. Moreau is really garbage. And, you know, I need to actually talk about that real quick. You know, I mentioned before that Moreau is the worst boss ever made in the entire Resident Evil series, but that's actually not true. I was playing through Resident Evil 6 on Chris's campaign because I'm doing another walkthrough of Chris's campaign, and I was going through the Chopper boss fight on Chapter 3, like both fights, and the numerous times I got screwed by poor designs on the Chopper, on its hitboxes, and also by peers. It took me at least 2 hours to actually get a clean fight where I took no damage and I wasn't getting screwed by any of the poor designs, and to actually make the fight look good. And there were other situations where I did restart on my own accord, but that was only because I wanted to go through the bullshit again, because those situations where I did succeed, I must have gotten very lucky, and I need consistency. But the boss fight with the Chopper is easily the worst boss fight ever made in the entire Resident Evil series. It is the most rushed boss fight in all of Resident Evil's history. It has no thought put into it. Your AI partner fucks you over. The hitboxes are so trash. You get hit through the geometry all the time. Then you have those Juavos just getting in the way. And then you have the Chopper just somehow instantly switches to you with its spotlight, and then the machine gun just endlessly fires. The explosive rounds have some garbage hitboxes on them. Yeah, that is a worse boss fight than Moreau. And I think the only reason why I said that Moreau was the worst boss in all of Resident Evil history is because of how much I had such high expectations for Resident Evil Village. But Moreau just really represented a lacking quality in boss designs, and the number of hitbox problems he has, just the times where he gets stuck on the geometry so easily, and all these other situations where he has way too much health. Like, the only kind of developer that can make that kind of boss fight is a developer that doesn't care. A 2-year-old could make that kind of fight. And, when a developer is making that kind of fight, it warrants the whole title of being the worst boss ever made in the entire Resident Evil series. But, the Chopper has definitely one-upped that. That is definitely the worst boss ever made in the entire Resident Evil series. And admittedly, it's likely because they wanted you to spam healing items like crazy, because healing items were probably the intended way to play Resident Evil 6, which is kind of contradictory to the challenge that they give you in Resident Evil 6, where there's a medal that you can obtain for beating the entire chapter without using healing items and without taking any damage. So what is up with that? Why would you put in that kind of medal system for a game that is not designed with no life cube loss or no damage in mind? That really doesn't make any sense, and I feel like they only did that because there's a thing that you can do to get medals easily in Resident Evil 6, or at least those kind of medals, where you play the last subchapter of the chapter, and if the last subchapter doesn't present with so much bullshit, you can easily get that kind of medal done. But I question why they would favor that kind of route if, like, they're not even going to put in any kind of, like, challenge that can actually be done for the full chapter. They instead design these challenges that are only possible in the last subchapter, and it's just a similar case with the Knives Out challenge in Resident Evil Village. It's the exact same case, where the Knives Out challenge in Resident Evil Village is more practical on amateur difficulty and not on Village of Shadows difficulty, and that's not what you go to a challenge for. A challenge is getting, like, the highest difficulty done, and you get satisfaction from that. But you're telling me that you want players to get satisfaction out of playing a game where the enemies do nothing and they just stand around and they're so slow and they barely do anything? Like, you seriously want to slog the player through that? You want the players to go through that kind of slog? And then you want them to somehow gain satisfaction from that? You're encouraging people to play on easier difficulties, and you're forcing them to play through a false experience. And I've already elaborated on this tangent so many times as to why harder difficulties are the most important thing to consider when it comes to a game, because harder difficulties showcase the developers putting more hard work into the game, and the designs already apparent in the game are recognized a lot more on the harder difficulties, and you'll see if the designs are actually functional, if they aren't functional, and it shows the developer's true line of thought. Like, if they actually have the ability to comprehend what they're doing with their own designs, then their harder difficulty will be well designed, and therefore the game will be well designed. And the whole point of a survival horror game is to get a stressful experience, and that's the whole point of the hardest difficulty. But when your hardest difficulty is relying on poor designs to somehow deliver this illusion of difficulty, and you're trying to use that to buy into the minds of all these individuals, to actually convince them that the game is actually serviceable for a challenge, that right there makes no sense at all. Not no sense, that right there is just straight up like cheating. They're cheating you out of a functional game. They're cheating you out of the true survival horror series. And I need to actually voice something related to this, because one of my subscribers, Pulkit Sharma, he left a comment in one of my videos when I was recreating Ether Strategy, and he said that he hasn't tried Village of Shadows difficulty because it hurts my opinion of Village. And, he was complaining about the enemy placements and the boss. Like, they should have just let the boss speak for itself. And specifically with Bella's boss fight, and I agree with him 100%. And, I said to him, I understand your reasoning for not doing Village of Shadows, but harder difficulties represent the true experience developers wanted players to go through. They represent the true intelligence of the developers, and any holes present in the game will be made known. Holes that should have been properly playtested. Like, the whole point of these easier difficulties is to deliver a false experience, and that's what the developers are trying to do. Like, this is a practice that a lot of developers do that is just a very scummy practice. They focus a lot on these easier difficulties to deliver a false experience and not put any hard work. And they know that they can easily fool a fan base because gamers are so stupid. Like, gamers represent a very dumb subgroup that aren't capable of recognizing these kind of functional or like these kind of mechanical designs. Like, they can't recognize these kind of designs because they want to go to games for a very mind-numbing experience. I mean, I didn't voice that part of it in the comment, but continuing on, like, again, I understand why you don't want to do it, but I prefer not to remain in ignorance. Plus, with the number of people calling this game perfect, yet they played on the easier difficulties, the chances of these broken designs returning in Resident Evil 9 is very high. That's another reason why harder difficulties are important. And then he replies, let me be in my bubble. Plus, I disagree that the hardest difficulty represents the true experience, especially in contemporary scenarios where games are being more and more inclusive. Most people will play the game on normal, and I am pretty sure that the developers gave the most thought and time to that difficulty. Now, I personally played it on hardcore thrice now, and even on that difficulty, I could see how some things were great, but others, like sponge boss battles, were just put there because developers were too lazy to make meaningful changes in the difficulty. That is why I say that Village is a 7 out of 10 experience. I always say that on hardcore, which is in my opinion the best difficulty to enjoy Village. I wish I could agree with that, but like, even if it is the best difficulty, you can't excuse the highest difficulty. Like, continuing on, Village of Shadows, in my opinion, is just there to say that our game has replay value, and that is a shame. However, I will agree that on VOS, some design issues are very visible. Shit hitboxes, for example, which are objective faults, which one might miss out when playing on hardcore or lower difficulty. Now, that point that he made about Village of Shadows difficulty, where it just seemed like they only put the difficulty in just to showcase the game has any replay value at face value, and we all know how unreliable face validity is when it comes to actually judging something. That point makes a lot of sense to me, and I do agree with Pulkit Sharma on that, but it's hard to really agree with the other points that he made. But to continue with this friendly discussion, and, I voice this in the next comment, like, true experience in the sense that it's a survival horror game. You can't get a true survival horror experience on a low difficulty. That's not the point of that kind of genre. The hardest difficulty is meant to be the stressful experience, but also the difficulty that's meant to show the developer's true mindset. If you have to play on a lower difficulty to enjoy a game at a functional level, then it shows the developers messed up on the game overall. If they don't display any care in a well-crafted higher difficulty, then it makes you view the game as a joke, which is what Village feels like most of the time, as you've heard me say many times. And with regards to developers giving more time to normal difficulty, if that were true, why include any difficulties above it? And also, like, certain problems that exist in Village of Shadows difficulty incur in normal difficulty because they represent problems with the overall game, so saying they devote more time to normal doesn't really make sense to me. And yes, I'm well aware that COVID had an impact, but decisions such as including enemies in Bella's boss fight occur independently of a pandemic. With COVID or without COVID, that shouldn't affect anyone's ability to play Bella's boss fight for a few minutes to see all the problems with it, and all they have to do is not include the Moriekas. And that's what I mean. Like, it just seems like a very simple thing, but for some reason it's not so simple in new Capcom's mind. It makes no sense why removing something from the game should be so complicated in their minds. And, I go on to say, I do think your final sentence on Village of Shadows is a fair assessment because it really feels like Village of Shadows is a meme difficulty. Hardcore difficulty should have been the final difficulty they included, which it's really sad to say that because, if hardcore difficulty was the last difficulty they included, that would have been very disappointing at the time when I was doing my blind playthrough. But, I heard about an extra difficulty And, I was very excited about it, but then when I was seeing the game for what it is on my blind playthrough, I was not going to be excited for the highest difficulty, and lo and behold, Village of Shadows difficulty is a shit difficulty, and it's no Madhouse difficulty. Madhouse difficulty from Resident Evil 7 will always be the best difficulty mode ever made in the entire Resident Evil series, because it's the only difficulty mode where the developers put in a lot of effort into going beyond the simple, oh, let's increase the enemy's health to an absurd degree, and let's make you die very fast. They did so much more than that with Madhouse difficulty, but Village of Shadows difficulty doesn't capitalize on this, and it's so disappointing. Ooh, something I need to talk about just then. So you might have seen me killing a lot of the Lycans, and you might have also seen me crafting a lot of mines. Well, Ether mentioned that if you are continually crafting pipe bombs or mines, and just using up all the metal scrap, if you have 0 metal scrap, the Lycans are more likely to drop metal scrap. And this is important because you need a ton of explosives for Moreau, because Moreau takes a big beating. And it's clear they want you to just spam explosives like crazy against Moreau. They want you to play like a retard. They want you to play like some brain-dead fool by just spamming explosives like crazy. And it's not like the explosives are that good against Moreau, because they don't stun him consistently like they do on hardcore difficulty, and I don't know why they would do that. So they want you to instead rely upon holes in Moreau's design in order to get him to expose his weak spot, and you're going to be seeing such holes in a moment when I get to Moreau's boss fight, and they want to favor that rather than skillfully designed stun systems. Like, what does that say about new Capcom? What does that say about the shortcuts that they're trying to take? It borders on inhuman. It's not realistic. It's not common sense in the slightest. Why would they do that? And it's clear that they didn't bother playtesting the game properly to understand how dumb this kind of design choice was. And speaking of which, we're about to encounter Moreau in a moment, and I'm going to showcase something that I discovered by myself. I discovered this when I was trying to do a run where I'd be doing pistol only and explosives on hardcore difficulty, but I just abandoned the run entirely. And you'll see in a moment. So I need to open up with shooting Moreau with the sniper rifle and the shotgun, and you have to hit him in the weak spot about 6 times, and then you need to get him to do his melee attack by standing close to him, so run away at the right moment, hit him with 1 blast from the shotgun, and then this is the important right here. So when you hit Moreau's weak spot, he flinches upward, and if you strafe right and then you crouch at the right moment, you don't have to crouch a lot of the times, but I choose to do it there because I was getting moments where he was easily hitting me, even when I was strafing to the right. If you crouch at the right moment as you're strafing to the right, and you get hit by Moreau's tail while he's in the recovery frames, you will be put into a flinch animation but not take any damage. And because Moreau technically put you into a flinch animation, he's going to be forced to taunt, because that's what Moreau does. Whenever he damages you with a melee attack, he always taunts. And I'm guessing it's there to give the player the chance to get away, but I'm going to be able to use that to my advantage, and it's something I discovered on accident, which is very reliable. But follow the pattern exactly like how I'm doing it right here. So you got to make sure that you're placing the mines at the exact same points that I'm doing. You're not firing your gun at any moments that I'm not showcasing here. And you got to make sure that you space out your explosives correctly. And by the way, if you want to throw 2 pipe bombs in rapid succession without getting blown up by the first one, make sure you hold the block button after throwing the first pipe bomb so that you throw 2 pipe bombs in rapid succession. And that is a great strategy that Ether recommended, and I highly recommend you do it. But I've done a lot of damage to Moreau, and you even saw the moment where he went into that very lengthy stun animation that just allowed me to deal more damage to him with the mines. Like, it's so powerful. It's really powerful, and this is the fastest way to get rid of Moreau. And if you're taking this strategy and you're combining it with the red barrels, you can get rid of Moreau so quickly. And look at this right here. He's going to do the acid rain attack twice in a row without ever getting off the structure. That is how much damage I am dealing to him. And I bet your first reaction is, oh, this is so cool, and I bet this is what this person thinks, right? Well, I don't think this is cool at all. And while it is cool that I found this really quick method for dealing with Moreau, I don't like how you have to resort to a very unorthodox and downright inhuman strategy, because that just goes beyond the realm of human thought. Like, who in their right mind, in an actual realistic survival horror environment, would be using that to expose the weak spot of a boss like this? And it's at that moment where you realize you are playing a game, and you've already lost me at that point when it comes to your supposed survival horror experience. Like, it's so dumb, and they're wanting you to resort to this rather than a skillfully designed stun system where the stuns actually make a lot of sense with when he chooses to expose his weak spot, or going to this animation right here. And this made a lot of sense in hardcore difficulty, but they just made it cumbersome and awkward to deal with on Village of Shadows difficulty. And that right there is just borderline, like, joke difficulty. That is just borderline retarded. That is borderline childish. And I seriously want to, like, damn the developers to hell for actually embracing that for Moreau. Seriously retarded. Like, absolutely retarded. But right there, did you notice how I stunned him with the first mine, and then he didn't try to attack me with the melee attack? Well, I forgot to mention that if you stun Moreau while he's in the middle of a taunt animation, when he recovers from the animation, he will always do a taunt. The only time this messes up is when he is forced to do his foot stomping animation that he normally does whenever he's trying to initiate his acid rain attack, the first time he does his acid rain attack. So pay attention to that animation, because if he does it and you are not actively like stunning him or even like using a lot of explosives on him, if you don't deal enough explosive damage to him after he does that animation of stomping his feet, then he will skip out on doing the very lengthy stun animation, and he will walk towards you and he will damage you. So stupid, but that's why you gotta time your hits, and that's why you gotta use your explosives and your guns at the moments I've just shown, so that you do not encounter that situation where he chooses to not go into that lengthy stun animation the first time. And also, I found something really stupid with Moreau. So you know that cutscene that plays when you finally kill Moreau? Well, I actually discovered that you can take damage during that cutscene, because what happened was Moreau was in the middle of his melee attack, and he was about a split second away from nailing me with his melee attack, but I killed him before the split second came up, and he damaged me during the cutscene, and I have footage of this in my next poor designs of Resident Evil Village Part 2 video. That right there is so dumb. Why can you take damage during cutscenes? And why is that even a thing in the first place? It just once again shows the rushed nature of new Capcom, and once again, it has nothing to do with the fact that COVID happened. Anyone in their mother would easily recognize that being a problem, regardless of whether there is a pandemic or not. And we've already seen how much we're adjusting to the pandemic. I've been able to work a steady job very well during the pandemic, and the pandemic has had no impact on me whatsoever. But if that is the case, then surely this has to not be the same case with new Capcom, a AAA developer who is of a higher standing in their job position compared to me. But no, they missed out on something as simple as that, and they decided to just not playtest Village of Shadows properly. They decided to favor awkward, cumbersome designs like what I showcased with Moreau, and they wanted to favor dumb enemy placements. And you see that right there? That Varkalak did not attack me because of the fact that there were enemies nearby. Because the enemies were in the middle of trying to attack me, they slowed the Varkalak down, so it's clear that the Varkalaks are not intended to be in areas where there are multiple enemy types around, yet they still opted for it because they're that dumb. Like, new Capcom, like, this team that made Resident Evil Village has to be the dumbest Resident Evil team I've ever seen. But at the same time, it's hard for me to feel overly negative because of the other positives I've just acknowledged with Resident Evil Village. Like, I could hate the Resident Evil 2 Remake team all I want, but I'm just so conflicted on my thoughts with the Resident Evil Village team, because the team that favored these kind of poor designs and dumb designs and childish designs for Resident Evil Village, the severity and impact of these brain-dead designs feels a lot more severe than a lot of the dumb designs in Resident Evil 2 Remake. But yet I still can't find myself to hate Resident Evil Village more than Resident Evil 2 Remake, because Resident Evil 2 Remake, it's not even that game, that's all I'll say. So maybe that's why I can't really rank Resident Evil Village lower than Resident Evil 2 Remake, because Resident Evil 2 Remake is not even a game. It's just, it feels like a horror simulator game where you're just running past everything, you're not wasting time going out of your way to get the guns, the enemies are no threat, and they favor poor designs with the enemies, and there's barely any enemy diversity with the enemies in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Like, it's just a game of nothing, and the characters are just done very poorly in Resident Evil 2 Remake, and then the scenarios that they put you in are so unimaginative and so boring, aside from G2 working. But yeah, Resident Evil 2 Remake has more negatives than Resident Evil Village, even if the severity of the negatives is more severe in Resident Evil Village than in Resident Evil 2 Remake. That's really all I'll say, but at least Resident Evil Village has the positives to slightly balance it out, when Resident Evil 2 Remake only has one good thing with it, and that's the save room music that you get when you're viewing the model viewer in Resident Evil 2 Remake, and with G2 Birkin. But G2 Birkin, he doesn't provide enough of an impact to really warrant being a memorable or fun experience. That's all I'll say on that. But we're now moving on to the Stronghold Lycan encounter, and the Stronghold Lycan encounter, I got bullied by the Lycans in this initial encounter, and it was for some really stupid reasons, but also there were some moments where I was trying to demonstrate the counter system that you can do on the Lycans, which it's not as inconsistent as I thought. It's just the way new Capcom play tested the counter system for the Lycans, where you shoot them in the head at the correct moment in their startup frames, or really at any point in their attack animation, aside from after the attack is done. Like, it's done so poorly because if you're not at level ground with the Lycan, or you're not at a lower elevation compared to the Lycan, you can't get the counter correctly. And even in those moments where you're on perfectly flat ground, you still don't get the counter with the Lycans at all. And this was especially problematic when I was trying to do Urias Knives Out, because Urias Knives Out is a tragic experience. It's not even like, I don't know what to say about Urias Knives Out. It's the worst experience I've ever done, and I think, in all honesty, Urias feels worse than Moreau because Urias feels poorly designed. He has a lot of like bad hitboxes, and like his hitboxes feel worse than Urias Strawhair and Urias Drock. Urias Drock has the best hitboxes out of all the Urias enemies, and Urias has the worst hitboxes compared to the other ones. And then, like, with some of the ways they designed his room is so badly designed because the changes in elevation on the ground affect your ability to dodge certain attacks that Urias does that work perfectly against Urias Drock, for instance, or like Urias Strawhair. I mean, Urias Strawhair does have those shit hitboxes, though, and I do demonstrate it in my Knives Out video, which I will include, and it's going to be, like, a very lengthy, like, rant video, or not even a rant video, because rant videos are just mindless. There's no mind-numbing thing to say when it comes to a rant when it comes to Knives Out in Village of Shadows, because objectively, it is the most brain-dead challenge you could ever do for a Resident Evil game, or just a game in general. And this is the counter system right here, which I've already demonstrated in version 1.2, but you see how I'm on like a lower elevation compared to the Lycan when I did that counter? That's why the counter registered, because I was at a lower elevation. Why on earth would they put in that kind of counter system, yet you're going to be favoring a mountainous landscape, and then you have ground that is not entirely flat? So how on earth are you supposed to discover this mechanic, and how on earth are you supposed to establish when the mechanic works? Like, if you actually designed the mechanic well, you would not have to ask these kind of questions. A AAA development team and the QA department couldn't bother rationalizing that when designing the counter system for the Lycans. And the incentive to do the counter is so little, because you don't do any damage. You don't do any additional damage when you counter. You do the same amount of damage that your weapons would do normally by not doing the counter, by just aiming for the head. And then all you're doing is just kicking the Lycan away. And can you kick him off ledges? No, you can't. Because whenever you're kicking Lycans away, when you do the animation of countering, for some reason, they don't register the fact that they're going to fall over a ledge. It's like the ledges all have invisible hitboxes while you're in the middle of a counter animation. And yeah, it makes no sense. There's zero incentive to partake in this counter system. And if the counter system was better designed, then maybe the encounter with Urias when you're doing it Knives Out, when you're dealing with those fucking Lycans, it would still be bad, but nowhere near as bad as it is now. And then again, if this was actually a very smart development team, they would not be encouraging you to do Knives Out for a game that is designed with all the weapons in mind. Objectively, it is designed with all the weapons in mind, and you want to glamorize this kind of challenge and turn the game into a slogfest and force people to waste countless hours of their time dedicated to this kind of challenge? Are you for real? And then you want to inflate the egos of all the people that try to take pleasure from this kind of experience befitting for an impotent individual? Seriously, like what are they doing? Just what the fuck are they doing? What is new Capcom doing right now? Just seriously, what are they doing? The questions just leave me hanging. I'm pissing in the wind here with contemplating why they favored these kind of dumb designs. And don't say for 1 second that, oh, you're supposed to do it on easy difficulty. Otherwise, don't market it as a challenge. And furthermore, just why not bother phrasing it to be like, oh, complete the game using only close combat weapons, but only do it on amateur difficulty. And furthermore, like, why not just phrase it to be like, oh, complete the game using only the LZ Answerer, because at least with the LZ Answerer, you have the ability to heal yourself by using the green lightsaber, and then the red lightsaber actually does damage, like a lots more damage than compared to the blue form, and way more damage than the other melee weapons. Like, why do you not phrase it to just be like, oh, complete the game using only the LZ answerer? And that actually feels a little bit more accommodating for the difficulty, even though it's still not designed for no damage in mind. It's not designed for no damage in mind. And when you're doing encounters like Sturm, for instance, the hit detection on this weak spot is horrendous when you're using a close combat weapon. And you deal so little damage to Sturm. And then you have these moments where, like, the Karambit has very little range in its detection compared to the other melee weapons. Why? And then you want to say, oh, you can easily do the game knives out, yet your knife combat is already shit as it is, and the range on your melee weapons is horrendous. It's really horrendous, and the damage is pitiful. And yet you clearly designed these bosses to be damage spongy and almost like a damage race in a sense. And then you want to let us go through these encounters like this? Like, imagine if I didn't have the grenade launcher here. Imagine what I would be doing. And this experience, going through this entire Stronghold-like encounter, just getting fucked by the AI system so much, because it's clear they want you to just get the AI out of the way by using explosives. Like, it's also contradictory to the very nature of Knives Out, and I can't explain it very well, because if you're a visual learner, you need to see the video that I'll be doing in the future. But this right here, I'm not going to be wasting time using the explosives, because I had a moment where I used the pipe bomb, but none of the enemies flinched. Absolutely crap. But I remember seeing a video where someone just hugged the right-hand side, and that just allowed them to bypass those enemies, and that's honestly better, because the Armored Lycan, it does try to do a melee attack, and it will knock other Lycans out of the way. It does friendly fire damage to the Lycans, but it's pitiful. It's like 10 damage. That's what it is, and I'm basing this on the Mercenaries mode. And now we're going to move on to Aureus, but this is where I need to start a new commentary, given that I'm very close to the hour limit, so I'll be right back. So now we're moving on to Aureus right here. And, you know, I said before that Moreau was the worst boss ever made in Resident Evil Village, but this might actually be the worst boss of Resident Evil Village, because the number of inconsistencies I've encountered with Aureus is absurd because of the way his environment is designed. And there's just a lot of these situations where dodges that are supposed to work perfectly against Aureus get messed up by the elevation of the ground. And he ends up tracking you differently, and then there are those times where his hammer doesn't clip into the geometry properly to cause him to bounce off the wall, and then the Lycans just prove to be a pain in the ass. I mean, normally they're not so much of a problem because you can use a flash grenade in order to get past them, but when they're in the arena, they are so annoying. And they seriously want to call this designed for Knives Out in mind, when the Lycans are already so painful to deal with using only the close combat weapons, because not only do they get a tremendous amount of forward momentum, but they also have the ability to immediately pull out their weapon whenever they're off camera, and then just immediately do their long-range melee attack bullshit, and it takes so much punishment before they go down, and during that time, Aureus is attacking you. The hit detection between his hammer and the Lycans is ambiguous at best, and it's just, there are those times where it looks like Aureus should be able to make contact with a Lycan, but it just doesn't work a lot of the times. And for Knives Out, you're pretty much expected to take mandatory damage from the Lycans in order to force them to stay still long enough so that Aureus jumps on them, and then he damages them. And you're pretty much having to waste time blocking right in front of them in order to force them to be in recovery frames for longer. And if both of the Lycans don't choose to initiate the grab animation, you're screwed. Then there's always the possibility of them just hitting you with their long-range bullshit, which is so poorly designed. Like, who thought that was a good idea? And who thought it was serviceable for a Knives Out challenge to give the Lycans the ability to immediately initiate an attack animation that gives them so much more momentum that you have no chance of getting away from it, even when you're at your fastest speed, and then you give them a long-range grab attack that can double hit you at times. It's so trash. It's really trash. But you might have noticed a new dodge just then that I didn't showcase previously in the previous versions of this walkthrough. But did you notice that one slam that Aureus did where he does the lengthy prep and then he just walks very fast towards you and then he slams his hammer? Well, if you stand in the correct areas of this arena and you crouch and you're moving towards him, he doesn't hit you with that hammer. It also works on Aureus Drock, and it's incredible. But the thing is that you're going to get those moments where he still hits you because of the changes in elevation, and the changes in elevation on the ground mess up with his tracking, because Aureus just gets tracking properties that aren't supposed to be the case at all with this kind of enemy, and it's just bullshit. And when his tracking messes up, he just hits you all the time. And then there are those moments where if you're standing on the right-hand side of the arena, like towards the door, even when you successfully crouch and Urias doesn't do that tracking nonsense, he still hits you for no reason because of the change in elevation on the ground. It's so bullshit. And then when he's on top of these columns, like where the columns were previously, it also affects his tracking. And because he's of a higher elevation than you, his hammer will always hit you whenever he does that move. So there's just so much here that is so broken, that is so improperly thought out, that is so irrational. And the number of hitbox problems that Urias has, I mean, this phase that he's in right now, the hitboxes are fine. But then the other phase, where he's just in the standard phase, the number of hitbox issues, and then the times where he does attacks in situations that are just really unavoidable. Like, you know the attack that he does when you're at close range and you're standing in front of his right leg and he just does that quick swipe with his hammer? He can do it even when you're not even at that close of a range. So it's just there are those times where he thinks you're quite close to him after he does his tracking slam, where he raises his hammer at vertical length, like almost at a right angle to the ground, and then he slams you, which is almost impossible to avoid. And I've also noticed with that move, even if you run right past him when he does that move, he cancels his animation. So it's almost like you're not intended to run past that move because of the way his animation cancels. And because of the way his animation cancels and with how awkward it looks, it leads me to believe you're not supposed... Like that move right there, you see that? That is the move where if you try to run past it and you successfully do it, he cancels his animation and just immediately goes back into a neutral state. And from there, he can initiate an attack animation almost instantly. So retarded. So... why do they make it where it is impossible to avoid? Like, why would they design that move in a situation where you're not supposed to run past it? It makes no sense. So you're supposed to strafe away from it, or you're supposed to run away from it, but you can't run past him when he does that move. It is trash. It is really trash. And do you see the amount of life Urias has right now? I'm intentionally not using the Magnum right here because I want to save Magnum ammo for the later encounters in Heisenberg's factory. But this is the amount of punishment Urias takes when you are not using the Magnum. This is absolutely absurd. And believe me, it's not as absurd as with Moreau, but it's still absurd nonetheless because this guy's more aggressive than Moreau, and he finally goes down right there. Yeah, it's definitely clear. They want you to use the Magnum for this fight, but is it really, though? Is that really the case if they're going to be designing a Knives Out challenge? And it's even more concerning when you consider that likely QA tested that challenge and thought it was serviceable. And what gets me even more angry is when you go into the challenges and you look at the Knives Out challenge. The Knives Out challenge rewards you with more CP than any other challenge in the game. It's like 70,000 CP. There is no other challenge in Resident Evil Village that gives you CP that is worth more than that. So they apparently value the Knives Out challenge more than the other challenges that they give you in the challenges list for Resident Evil Village. And that is severely concerning. That's really concerning if they value that challenge so much, because in their deluded mindscape, in their imagined scenario that they've thought this game would be like, Knives Out is apparently the baseline way to play this game. They said this game is designed for knife only, and that is why they're rewarding you with that much CP, more CP than any other challenge that they give you in the game. How does that make any sense? How deluded can you be? Did they even look back at their game? It just goes to show that new Capcom doesn't fully comprehend their own designs in the game. They do not comprehend their own designs. They completely deluded themselves into thinking that this game was designed for that kind of challenge in mind. And you want to know the worst part? This is probably the same team that made Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake. And yet, in those games, there is no challenge where it says that those games are designed for knife only in mind. And yet, with Resident Evil 2 Remake, it is designed for knife only. Because if you look at the fundamental designs, if you look back at my walkthroughs, the game works as intended. Aside from a couple of dragged out scenarios. But it feels a lot more serviceable as a knife-only product rather than with Resident Evil 3 Remake. And they at least had the integrity and respect for their game to not put in a stupid knife-only challenge for Resident Evil 3 Remake. Yet for some reason, they lost all respect for Resident Evil and they decided to put in a Knives Out challenge for Resident Evil Village, and yet decided to favor the boss philosophies and enemy philosophies and section philosophies like they did. Why? Why this contradictory mindset? Just why? Like, what is this? Are the people working at new Capcom psychotic? Are they schizophrenic? Are they flip-flopping between reality and some imagined scenario? Is that what they're doing? Like, what is this? Who the fuck playtested this game? Who QA tested this game? Who directed this game? I mean, Moriyasu Sato did, but why would he direct them like this? And it's like there's miscommunication involved, and this has nothing to do with the pandemic. It just feels like a fragmented team designed Resident Evil Village. And I've already acknowledged such fragmentation before with the likes of the Soldat 1 and the Soldat 2, where the Soldat 2 stab move, where it's thrust at you with both of its drills, you can crouch under that normally. Yet with the Soldat 1, if you're not aiming a weapon that is not the knife or the tack, and you don't aim the camera in a certain direction, you will never be able to crouch under that stab attack that the Soldat 1 does. Why? So much fragmentation involved, and I need to acknowledge such fragmentation in my review when I get the chance. But there's not much to say for Heisenberg's factory other than there were some parts that kind of bullied me, like this part right here. This part with the gears and then all these haulers everywhere, I have no patience for this section. It's one of the worst parts of the game because there's just a lot of haulers and you're just having to waste time shooting these gears, and you're just using flash grenades like crazy because it's a time-consuming process, and the way they program the flinch animations on the haulers is lazy because there's this whole system where if the gears hit the eyepiece directly, or if the game somehow registers that the gear hit the eyepiece directly, the haulers do the wrong flinch animation or they stumble forward. And there's also these moments where flash grenades just don't affect the haulers correctly, and while that may be due to the geometry, there are definitely those moments where there's no geometry in the way and the flash grenades they miss sometimes on that part, and it makes no sense. But we've done that part. That is a dreadful one. That's definitely the worst part of Heisenberg's factory, in my opinion. That whole gear room. Every other part is decent. And, like, Sturm is a fun boss fight, but when you're considering it from the context of Knives Out, that's supposed to be the baseline way to play. So really, I shouldn't be calling Sturm a fun fight if they're considering Knives Out to be the baseline way to play, which is actually, like, the actual intended way to play this game and to actually view this game. Then Sturm's a shit fight. Sturm is a shit fight. Bella, Daniela, Cassandra, Lady Dimitrescu, and Moreau, and Urias Strawhair, and Urias Drock, and Miranda, all of them are shit on Knives Out. So it's clear they've designed a game with shit bosses if they're considering Knives Out the baseline way to play, which is what everyone should be doing, right? I mean, they only glamorized it by putting in 70,000 CP, more CP than any other challenge in the game. Like, it's clear that is the baseline way they want you to view this game, and if that is the case, then they've designed a shit game. And, like, yeah, why bother indulging in the weapons? Why bother indulging in the crafting? Why bother indulging in any other side activity when you can just mindlessly go through the game and just spamming healing items and playing like a retard? Yeah, that is exactly what we want to view a Resident Evil game as. That is exactly what we want people to do. We want them to have a mind-numbing experience. Is that really the message you want to send with Resident Evil Village, and you're considering this to be the true origin of Resident Evil, and you're wanting to honor Ethan Winters by making this his own personal story? And then you want to introduce these really interesting set pieces, yet you're completely undermining them with the Knives Out challenge? Is that really the game you want to make? Is that really what you're wanting us to do? Like, oh, don't put any weapons then. Just remove a lot of the enemies. Just remove all these other designs that are complementary to the whole idea of the game being designed for all the weapons in mind. Just make it a Knives Out experience. Just make it as bare bones as Resident Evil 2 Remake. Just make it as bare bones as Resident Evil 1 Remake. Yeah, that's the game you want to make. Stop swaying me with your lies then. Like, why are they trying to deliver this kind of false experience? Why are they trying to lie to their own fan base? That's just the kind of reaction they're eliciting in me right now. That's just like I'm practically the Gordon Ramsay right now. This is the kind of attitude that Gordon Ramsay would have towards anyone so deluded as to think their cooking techniques are refined when they're flawed. Like, this is what I feel right now. This is sarcasm at its finest, because it's like New Capcom wants me to be sarcastic towards this game and just be sarcastic towards their own design philosophies and the like. And I'm saying all this right now, but then I'll be saying positives about Resident Evil Village, because it's just too easy to flip-flop between mentalities with this game, given how fragmented the team was when designing this game. It really feels like there was fragmentation involved. And, I'm saying, like, Knives Out is the baseline way to play, but just for integrity, just to preserve my own integrity and to preserve my status as a Resident Evil player, a true Resident Evil player, I'm still going to try my best to view this game with all the weapons in mind. And even then, it's a semi-decent game when you're factoring in all the weapons, and it still has the same problems with its bosses, with its hitboxes, with just its lackluster combat and lack of any real imagination with the gameplay. It's disappointing. It's still a very disappointing game, yet it still has those positives. But when you're doing it Knives Out, Those positives, no matter how many positives the game has that are not related to gameplay, they will not be able to overshadow the negatives involved with the Knives Out challenge. And if Resident Evil 9 has a Knives Out challenge and it follows the same format as Resident Evil Village, then Resident Evil is going to be damned to hell. Resident Evil is going to be dead. And yet they will still get Ultimate Game of the Year, this and that, because they're able to fool their deluded fan base. That's really all I'll say, because fake Resident Evil players just plague the fan base too much. And they're so easily swayed by a false experience because the developers are so good at delivering this false experience when they should be designing the true experience, right? The true experience that they truly value. You know, like, Village of Shadows difficulty removes a lot of the stun animations. They make the stun animations cumbersome to deal with, like when you're trying to use the shotgun on a Lycan, and you have a point-blank shot to their head, but the reticle is so dishonest that you end up prioritizing the wrong body part, and you get the wrong stun animation, and the shotgun is too slow, and you take damage in the process. And then they want to remove all these other, like, skillfully designed stun systems with certain bosses. They want to make the bosses drag on for so long. And yet, in their official gameplay before they released Resident Evil Village, they still showcase the game at normal difficulty, or when they base the difficulty of Mercenaries mode around normal difficulty, where the enemies have all the stun systems and the designs I'm expecting from a true Resident Evil game. So why are they doing that? Why the false advertising? It's almost like when they say, oh, guarding will be an important part of the game. Yet, have you seen me use guarding once in this game, aside from that one Morieka I used it against in the blood area? Or when they're saying all these other things in their gameplay videos and in the like before the game officially released? Like, it's absolutely baffling. So, like, why are you delivering that when it's just a lot easier to actually deliver the true experience that you wanted, just to deliver a broken game with absolutely no thought put into it, because that's clearly the designs you value, and that's exactly how fucked up your mindset is if you truly believe that is the best way to deliver a game experience. It's, you know, like, I can't stand it when developers try to portray their game in one light when in another light that is actually the truth. The game is so different to how they're actually portraying it. And, you know, I talked about this kind of thing before when I was commenting on Ether's video where he did the original version of Resident Evil 2 on Nightmare difficulty, pistol only. And I'm not going to talk about it in this video because I think it's better reserved for another video because, you know, Carcinogen SDA had responded to my comment, and I feel like it's better reserved for another video where I can actually go into a little bit more detail about this. But since we're on the topic of comments that people have responded to me on, let me continue the discussion I had with Pulkit Sharma, given that Heisenberg factory is pretty simple. So continuing on, Pulkit Sharma then goes on to say that I agree that survival horror games should be played on hardest difficulties, and that is why I played my first playthrough of 7 on normal difficulty and of Resident Evil Village on hardcore difficulty. Also, your argument on inclusion of highest difficulty can also be seen from the other side, that if the hardest difficulty is the intended way, then why even include lower difficulties? They can just go the From Software route. I generally believe that the developers put more time on difficulty than most casuals and journals will play through. I personally don't see Village of Shadows as a difficulty. I 100% agree with that, by the way. It is just a shit show there to make a back-of-the-box point, and I agree with Virtue of playing games on Village of Shadows difficulty as it makes design faults more visible, but I can't agree with Village of Shadows being the intended way and that the game should exclusively be looked through it. It is a terrible mode. Nothing else, though I am agreeing that I am choosing ignorance and that your opinion holds more objective credibility. Yeah. And then, like, I totally agree with him on the parts of Village of Shadows difficulty. Like, that Village of Shadows difficulty is no real difficulty. It's half-baked and it delivers a false challenge. And then I followed up with, speaking of challenge, what do you think of them including a Knives Out challenge / trophy for Resident Evil Village? And this is what Pulkit Sharma had to say. Stupid. When your knife gameplay sucks, why make a challenge to make it more visible? They just looked at past Resident Evil games and knife-only communities and included it without actually making the game designed around it. Forcing people to play the game in a way it is not designed to be in is not challenging in any slightest. It is unfair, frustrating, and lazy. However, again, for me, it doesn't matter because I have never been into knife-only runs. And yeah, I will never be into knife-only runs unless the game is intrinsically designed for knife-only in mind. If its fundamental designs complement that, which is why I only ever do knife-only for Resident Evil 1 Remake and Resident Evil 2 Remake, because those games objectively are designed for knife-only. There is no subjectivity involved with them. Oh, by the way, before I continue on this point, look at this. You see how Heisenberg is doing this move where he's trying to initiate the walls on me? Well, if you don't shoot Heisenberg and you let him finish that animation, if you stop him with the cannon, all of the walls will disappear. So I won't have to deal with them getting in the way as, like, annoying obstacles. That right there is one of the coolest design choices in this game, and it's one of the few Resident Evil designs that I'm so glad they put into this Resident Evil level fight. Heisenberg, it will always be the best boss of this game, by far. But I'm not going to dwell on the positivity too much, because I've already talked so much about the great things that Heisenberg delivers with his boss fight. Oh, this move right here, you see that move that he was trying to do? That move is almost impossible to avoid unless you get very close to him and you strafe to the left. Like, if you're far enough away from him, Heisenberg just tracks you down. If you don't have the cannon, you're fucked. There is nothing you can do. And the problem with that is, at times you can do that move after he does this move right here. So if you shoot him with the cannon, when he exposes himself, and he does that move afterwards, your cannon's not ready, so you have no chance of stopping it unless you hit his weak spot, and his weak spots are very hard to hit when he does that move. But most of the time, whenever you stop Heisenberg from using the wall move, he will try to do this, where he gets into this whole loop, where he's trying to do the charge attack on me, but I'm denying him the opportunity because I'm hitting his weak spots. And Heisenberg takes damage on his full body, it's just the weak spots are the only place where he registers any stuns, and it deals the maximum amount of damage to him. So while he's busy prepping the walls, you can be busy shooting him with your machine gun, just not at his weak spot, so that you're forcing him to do that move. And yeah, Heisenberg will go down super fast. Just not very fast though when it comes to the challenge, because you have to beat Heisenberg in under 4 minutes with the challenge, but the problem is you have cutscenes, and the game doesn't bother stopping the timer when cutscenes are playing. So, you know, like, if you're in the middle of a speedrun of Resident Evil 2 Remake or Resident Evil 3 Remake and you were enjoying the cutscenes, you can at least take the time to watch those cutscenes and not have your timer be tampered with by the game. But you can't do that in Resident Evil Village. If you are watching cutscenes, the timer will still count down. So if you're in the middle of trying to beat the game in under 3 hours, or you're trying to actually get your own speedrun done, you have to skip the cutscenes. So all these cutscenes that they're trying to make you value in this game, you're not going to get the chance to watch them if you're too busy trying to speedrun the game. It's dumb. It's really dumb. And how can you possibly enjoy the game? Like all these cutscenes, for instance, when you're in the middle of a speedrun. It's just backwards thinking. And it's just so odd because the previous Resident Evil games didn't have this issue. I don't understand that at all. That makes no sense. But I go on to continue my point with Pulkit Sharma by saying, exactly. Like, I feel like they only did the Knives Out challenge to benefit the business model and target more older fans with this kind of stupid challenge. It's like the developers are acknowledging their own shortcomings in programming by forcing people to find holes in the game to exploit to their advantage. And they make it seem like the holes were intended designs. Like, this is how they actually wanted people to play the game. And they want you to spam healing items, drag fights out, and be reliant on New Game Plus items. I wouldn't mind the challenge so much if it said beat the game with only the LZ answerer. It would still be dumb, but nowhere near as dumb as it is now. By phrasing it with close combat weapons only, they're encouraging people to do tedious runs with the Karambit. If the developers say it's designed, the gullible fans will believe anything the developers tell them. Then the fans will say that going through a broken experience is skillful and rewarding, which is seriously dumb. Not only that, but the challenge is more befitting for easy difficulty, which is completely counterintuitive to the whole idea of a challenge. I've recorded a Knives Out run on BOS in separate videos, and I'm seriously going to call out new Capcom and the knife-only players on their bullcrap. And then he goes on to say, your videos definitely deserve more eyes on them. They are the most in-depth analysis of Village from a mechanical perspective. If I remember correctly, the game had balancing issues from the very initial stages of development, and COVID might have had impact on it, but to be fair, it is the final product that we can analyze irrespective of the conditions during the making of it, which I did a reaction video to new Capcom's internal struggle video, and I call it the most pitiful video ever. It's almost like new Capcom is apologizing in their video, and it has to be one of the worst development videos I have ever seen for a game by far. And I don't know if that compares to Resident Evil 2 Remake's development video, which I did a commentary on when I was doing my first Resident Evil 4 walkthrough, and it was on part 1 of Chapter 5, where I discussed this video before. But it was honestly one of the most retarded development videos I'd ever seen, but Village's internal struggle video might as well take the cake for that. That has to be it. But, like, The final point that I addressed with Pocket Sharma is, yeah, QA testers found the gameplay to be bad in the initial stages, and so what if COVID had an impact? It doesn't stop them from using their brains, but common sense was lacking in so many areas. And it's the same case that Gordon Ramsay described in Hell's Kitchen when he was talking to Jonathan on season 9, where Jonathan was complaining about pain that he was having. And, Gordon Ramsay said that it doesn't stop you from using his brain, and that he had a competitor in season 6 of Hell's Kitchen that won, despite the fact that he broke his arm. So he was still able to use his brain. Consider the broken arm as being COVID. And yet he was still able to actually win the competition in season 6. So, COVID has no impact at all on the thought processes involved with how the developers choose to implement certain designs. They're just making COVID the main culprit for this because they want to use COVID as a scapegoat to just excuse all their own problems with their mentalities and the like. That right there is just... That's very feeble. That is really feeble. Own up to your mistakes, new Capcom. Just own up to the fact that you are just completely brain dead when designing this kind of game. And you want to call this game the final conclusion of Ethan Winters, and you want to say that this will be the darkest version of Chris Redfield ever, when in actuality Chris Redfield is easily the most idiotic character ever in all of Resident Evil Village. He plays like shit, he talks like shit, the way he's portrayed in the previous games, it's so incongruous with the way he's portrayed in Resident Evil Village, because the Resident Evil Village version of Chris is not the same Chris that you saw in the previous games. This is some false version of Chris. He has to be. He sounds like Carlos in a lot of situations, and then he plays the role of a villain out of nowhere. And yet, we've seen the way he's acted with peers. We've seen the way he's acted with Jake, for instance, at the end of Chapter 5 of his campaign on Resident Evil 6. Why is he so different in this? And it's all done because of poor storytelling. It's bad writing. And when you make a character like this with pre-established conditions, and then you immediately deny those pre-established traits in this game, you are immediately discrediting the build-up that you provided with Chris Redfield, his development as a character. This feels more like a de-evolution than an actual evolution. He plays like shit. He doesn't even do any of the things that he does from the Not a Hero DLC. And he's dealing with the same problems that Ethan's been facing with the Lycans, so I'm forced to rely upon exploits like this. And his weaponry is god-awful. He doesn't have a shotgun, he just has a machine gun, and that's pretty much the only weapon you'll be using, unless you go in with Knives Out, of course. And, why would they develop these kind of sequences with Chris Redfield if they're not complementary to the whole idea of Knives Out? And just the way new Capcom is trying to be so strict with the challenge, they don't even allow you to use the laser pointer in the Knives Out challenge, and it's not exactly an official weapon. It's a weapon that takes time to build up, and it's just a missile that you're firing. Someone else is firing it! And then you want us to drag out scenarios? You want us to seriously waste time with Uri's straw hair and just knife his leg repeatedly when we could be speeding it up using the target pointer? Why? Why are you being that strict in trying to enforce this kind of challenge that doesn't need any enforcement at all? It's a challenge that shouldn't have even been considered in the initial stages of development. It's like they're playing the role of hall monitor, but they're doing a very shit job at hall monitoring, and they're trying to serve as governor for these set of rules that are very broken in the context of the game. What is that? God. And you can totally understand why I say that the Resident Evil Village team has to be the stupidest development team ever for a Resident Evil game by far. And there have been some dumb development teams out there for the Resident Evil series, like with Resident Evil 1 Remake, with Resident Evil 2 Remake. But this one really takes the cake. And yet I can still look past all that and see a lot of the positives with Resident Evil Village. And I say a lot. I mean, there's not that many positives, but the positives can at least serve to balance out some of the negatives with Resident Evil Village, but not all of them. And even a dumb development team can create something special with some of its positives. Yeah, but there's no excusing that. The severity of the negative problems present in Resident Evil Village just far outweigh the severity of any other problems present in the other Resident Evil games. This game has problems, but they're more known given how severe the problems are. That's what I mean. And speaking of problems, we now have Chris's section, which I haven't been talking over much because I despise this section to no end. And originally, in my blind playthrough, I was very neutral about it. I was actually excited because, it was my first time playing as Chris Redfield, and his section kind of felt different. But Then when I was actually back in the correct mindset, when I was doing repeat playthroughs, this section is easily the worst section ever made in Resident Evil Village. And there are some shit boss fights for sure, but for a section, this is an absolute disgrace on this game and on the Resident Evil series. Because this makes a mockery of Resident Evil 4, this makes a mockery of Resident Evil 7, and it is an absolute mockery on the character of Chris Redfield. And it's a mockery of Resident Evil 4 because this is a section that people often cite as being an action set piece that Resident Evil, in their minds, is not known for. And they like to blame Resident Evil 4 for introducing this. And this section, with how poorly designed it is, and with the way it tries to introduce a lot of enemies at you, a lot of shit enemies, bear in mind, it just causes people to blame Resident Evil 4 even more, and this section doesn't even have any of the interesting systems that Resident Evil 4 had to really differentiate Chris Redfield from Ethan Winters. This is a mockery of Resident Evil 7, because if this was in Resident Evil 7, this would actually be well designed. I mean, the Not a Hero DLC had very similar sections like this. I mean, not involving anything involving a stupid laser pointer system. But these kind of set pieces where you're fighting like so many enemies at once, it works so much better in Resident Evil 7, because Resident Evil 7, with the Not a Hero DLC, had the systems necessary to balance it out. But that section had none of that charm whatsoever. And bear in mind, the Not a Hero DLC was actually really well designed. Every single mistake is your fault. And that is why I love that DLC to death. And I even did it, no damage, no save, which goes to show just how well designed that piece of content is. But that right there is not well designed. And the Lycans, they just have the ability to just do all the bullshit that they can do. And, you know, trying to keep them off of you is a pain in the ass. And you have the archers who can't die for some reason. And then you have the armored Lycans. And if you're not using your grenades, you're gonna have a hard time with that sequence. They're just a very boring time. Like, it's just so unimaginative and uninspired. It's literally a Call of Duty section. Like, the enemies feel so much like Call of Duty enemies with their generic, simplistic designs and nothing else. And then the things that you're doing in Chris's section just feel very generic and boring, just like any typical Call of Duty section. And it's a mockery of Chris Redfield in the sense that Chris plays like shit in this whole entire section, because he only seems to be doing things that only his Resident Evil 1 remake self would be capable of doing, and he displays no knowledge of fighting BOWs, even though he's been fighting BOWs ever since 1996. And he doesn't display any of the advanced combat techniques that he displayed in Resident Evil 7's Not a Hero DLC, and he's fighting easily the most bare-bone enemy designs ever. Like, every single enemy he faces are just reskins of enemies that we fought, and Urias Strawhair is no different. Even though he's wielding a different weapon, he's still just like Urias, and he's doing very similar moves to what Urias did. And I actually learned something about Urias. So, you know this move that Urias Strawhair does, where he first does this, like, spinning horizontal attack, and then he does a slam that is meant to hit you at long range? Well, Urias can do that, but it's a very rare move that Urias can do, and he's doing the move right now. See, this is the same move that Urias can do, and this hitbox is very awkward, because I mean, like, a lot of Urias Strawhair's moves, you can just avoid them by simply staying close to him and crouching, staying right in front of his left leg, which only goes to show how lazily designed this guy is. If this guy is so focused on doing long-range attacks that he can't think of doing something as simple as hitting you when you're this close to him. But in a way that's actually good, because then crouching actually feels like it has a bit of a purpose, and it feels like his hitboxes are better designed. But the only reason it seems like the hitboxes are better designed is because Urias Strawhair is significantly larger than Urias, but he still does the exact same kind of attacks that Urias does. But because he's higher up off the ground, it's easier to avoid them, which is definitely how the hitboxes should have been with Urias, but it's not the case at all with Urias. Then there are those moments where Urias Strawhair just hits you for no reason. Like, the amount of times he's hit me with that horizontal plus vertical attack, and I've been so close to him, there's no possible way he could hit me. It is absurd, and it's just another great example of why this section is the worst section ever made in Resident Evil Village. Like, it gets so much wrong, and all of the things that made the Not a Hero DLC great are just absent from this entire piece of content, and everything that makes a Resident Evil game great is lost in that whole entire section. It's bad. It is bad on so many levels, and Mother Miranda's lab is not enough to salvage that whole entire damnable section. That is a disgraceful section. It is so disgraceful on everything that Resident Evil has been known for, with its positive qualities, with its gameplay. And anyone could have designed that section and just made it shit. But right now, I'm just preparing for Mother Miranda, and Mother Miranda is a decent final boss. I mean, she is definitely the perfect symbolism for the combination of bioterrorism and occultism. And, you know, she's fun, but of course, from the context of Knives Out, she's shit. And the knife has such very poor detection on her. And there's not even a specific sound effect that plays when you knife her. All you see is just blood. But the ambiguity as to whether you're hitting Mother Miranda or not can get you confused so much. And the fight just drags on for an eternity when you're doing it Knives Out. And if you have the LZ answer, just go for it. But I imagine people are just like, oh, if you use the LZ answer, you're a fucking noob. That's exactly what you are. I'm sorry, but actually having a life and actually making the game seem like it works and actually playing a game that is not, like, 1% finished, you really think that makes me a noob? Where I'm not succumbing to such a primitive temptation to just compromise my own gameplay experience to somehow get some new kind of satisfaction, like some drug addict seeking a fix? That's exactly what you people are. If you think this game is serviceable for Knives Out. Absolutely absurd. And it's interesting that I bring this up because I want to actually talk about a comment someone left behind in one of my videos for The Evil Within, handgun/consumable only. So this dude was praising me for doing that kind of run on The Evil Within, and he said he's been learning new things. He loves how forceful such a restriction is, enforcing you to play the game in a very impractical way. And he likes to do these kind of weird restrictions on these kind of games. And, you know, while he did agree with me that the game flows better when you're doing it with just all the weapons, he still took my point the wrong way. Like, I followed up on this point, and I was like, I wish I never did this run in the first place. I practically turned into a drug addict seeking a fix, trying to get something new out of this, and in the process turned this game into a broken and unfinished mess that isn't practical to do. It's downright self-destructive and disrespectful to the game, doing such runs like these that go below the baseline way to play. So while I do appreciate the positivity in your comment, I'd rather you not call me amazing or call this run impressive. And then his comment to this, I don't know what to think of this comment, because in a way I just feel very insulted by this, or like it just feels like it's patronizing, or like he's patting me on the back like I'm a child. It doesn't feel right to me. He's like, okay, sorry, I didn't know it turned out that bad. Hope you're doing better. Hope you're doing better now. It's almost like he took my point about me turning into a drug addict seeking a fix when I was doing this run, literally. Like, I literally turned into a drug addict. Well, why on earth would he say that? And then I had to clarify, no, I didn't turn into an actual drug addict. I'm doing better now that I'm no longer glamorizing these kind of runs with a pistol/consumable only. And then he follows up with, okay, that's good. I would agree that you should do the runs you like to do rather than force yourself to grind away at stuff you have no pleasure. Well, why are you applying such a subjective bias to that? Don't do these kind of runs if you actually have integrity, if you actually have dignity, if you actually have some respect for your fucking game. Like, why is he phrasing it like that? And then, to continue on, for instance, I would probably never complete a speedrun of the game. That would drive me crazy personally. It's a game, after all. No reason to push yourself beyond the point of actually enjoying the game. I personally just like these kind of runs myself. So thanks for this kind of run, even if it was a negative experience for you. It's such a bizarre response on his part. Like, the fact that he's even trying to find the goodness in these kind of runs is concerning. It's just like what QA was probably thinking when they were trying to find the goodness of Knives Out in Resident Evil Village. Like, seriously, this guy's comment is so off-putting, and it's easily one of the most bizarre comments anyone has ever made when it comes to replying to a point I'm trying to make. Like, not only did he take my whole point of a drug addict seeking a fix literally, but then he tries to somehow find the goodness in this whole handgun/consumable only run of The Evil Within, like he has no respect, and like he's trying to actually seek some kind of new experience that's absolutely impractical to do, and you're not learning anything from these kind of runs. Like, it seriously pisses me off that he was even attempting to find this kind of, like, this path. Like, why would he do that? Who the hell wastes their time like that? Oh wait, every single normal individual on the planet. Because apparently it's a normality to seek all these kind of weird runs. And that's what seriously pisses me off about these kind of people. And I know he was trying to be very innocent with his comment, you know, he's being like supportive of me, this and that, but even if it's an innocent or supportive comment, the fact that he's just voicing it the way he is, just without any sense of restriction on his part, just freely, like this is how he actually is, like he's expressing himself in this comment to a complete stranger like myself. Like, at that point, if that's really the kind of person you are, I cannot respect that kind of individual, even if you are being a very innocent person when you're making a comment like that that's not meant to entice me into conflict or anything. But whatever, I don't care about that. And I've talked through Miranda's boss fight, which you already understand how to fight Miranda, and you already understand that this phase is timed. So I think it's time that we end this walkthrough that eventually became a Resident Evil Village hate video, and I might as well title it as such. Like, at this point, when I'm doing walkthroughs, or just, like, doing walkthroughs of games again, it's becoming these kind of videos with, like, for instance, my Resident Evil 7 walkthrough that became a Resident Evil Village disappointment video, or my Resident Evil 3 remake video. This is what it's becoming at this point, because of how much Resident Evil Village disappointed me, and how much new Capcom is deluded in believing that this game is serviceable for Knives Out, and they're actually encouraging idiots to partake in this kind of challenge. Like, they actually matter in their minds. It's seriously sickening. It's sickening of them to have the brains to comprehend that. But I'll be talking more about this when I post my video of me doing Knives Out on Resident Evil Village and just really shitting on new Capcom and all these knifers. And that's pretty much what it's all going to be. I'm not going to talk anything about the gameplay. It's going to feel no different to your typical rant, only with a bit of objectivity and seriousness to it. That's exactly what you're getting with that. But when that will come out, I don't know, because I don't know if I'm going to be that enthusiastic to do it, but maybe I have to have a sense of unenthusiasm in order to actually have the commentary to do that. But that remains to be seen. That is the end of this video. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.